Over the years of working as a commercial director of photography, I've picked up a lot of tips and tricks that a lot of people aren't talking about. We're going to talk about those today and unveil the curtains so you can start making better decisions as a cinematographer. Everyone is told to invest in fast glass or lenses that have low f or t-stops. Although this is true, a lot of people get carried away by shooting their project with the lowest aperture they can. One of the biggest misconceptions when working with lenses that have low t-stops is to shoot wide open. This gives you a very limited depth of field, which is good in some cases, but sometimes and most of the time it can work against you. This means that only a very small part of your image is going to be in focus. This gives you a very pleasing image, but dependent on the subject matter, this shallow depth of field is generally not needed. Also, if your subject moves even slightly, this could end up out of focus. I'd rather get a good performance out of my talent where their actions are in focus, not nerding out and trying to shoot at the lowest t-stop I can. I like to stay in the range of shooting my aperture at T2.8 to T4. This is the sweet spot for my work, where I'm shooting a lot of faces with wide lenses, big camera movements, and then just the general commercial feel. But there are still situations where I shoot wide open. The first is where I need an extra stop of light to properly expose my image. And the second is when the creative calls for it. This is usually in a dream, flashback, or a scene that requires a very dramatic feeling. And this goes back to what it means to be a cinematographer, that context is everything, especially when executing a director's vision. Speaking about bringing a director's vision to life, another technique that I wish I knew earlier was pre-visualization, or previs for short. It's the process of planning out your shots and sequences before stepping on set, and it's a key part of making sure everything runs smoothly during your production. As a cinematographer, I spend most of my time in the pre-production process, and having this mindset has changed everything. Pre-visualization helps ensure that you and the director are on the same page. By mapping out a visual style, framing, and movements in advance, you can get a clear understanding of how to tell the story visually. This not only saves you time, but also avoids confusion later on set, when decisions need to be made quickly. When you arrive on set with a clear, pre-visualized plan, you spend a lot less time figuring out shots on the fly and more time focusing on the execution. This can be especially valuable when you're working with tight schedules and limited resources. Scheduling and limited resources is something that everybody deals with on every level of production. Whether you're a one-man band videographer to a Hollywood movie cinematographer, when it comes to gear, sometimes it really doesn't matter. In my situation, I like to shoot my commercials on the Sony Venice as well as the Sony FX3. You would think as a cinematographer, I would prefer to shoot everything on the Venice for its superior image quality as well as features. But the funny thing about these two cameras is that I prefer to shoot on the Sony FX3 the majority of the time, just because of how easy it is to use. This is mainly due to its form factor, adaptability, and ease of use. I rather get a variety of interesting shots because I am using a camera that can fit anywhere and easily swap between multiple setups than get fewer shots on a camera that gives me maybe 10% of a better image. When looking at the relation of camera and price point, it's a flattening curve because as you go up in price, codecs and features do get better, but only by a small percentage. And there are so many affordable workarounds to this. I'm not going to be a part of the general population that says gear doesn't matter, but I'm going to say that the right gear does. And this is only done by research and also experience. Now, this tip is more about technical execution. When it comes to lighting, one of the most powerful techniques you will use is wrapping the light around your subject. This method goes beyond just a single key light. Instead, it's about creating a more natural, dynamic look by using multiple light sources to soften shadows as well as give your subject dimension. I remember when I started and I was using a 3-point lighting setup, and I remember saying to myself that this felt very unrealistic. And this was due to my key light of my subject. A single key light can often produce harsh shadows and contrast, which might work in some scenarios, but it can look unnatural in others. By adding additional light sources, you can control the shadows, filling in the area of the subject's face or body to give it a more three-dimensional appearance, while maintaining a sense of realism. Realism is key when it comes to cinematography, and let's look at an example to actually demonstrate that. Here is a perfect example of this because it has two lights in play acting as my key light. In this room, we are very fortunate to work with a lot of windows, so they are in the back as well as all along the side. And then outside these windows, as acting as my main key light, I have an aperture 1200D hitting all those shears and basically painting my room as well as painting my subject. So the light that you see here on my subjects is this harsh edge light that you see on the subjects as well as painting the other subject's face. What I was missing was more wrap around the face, and this is the perfect example of wrapping your light. So to wrap that light around, I used a panel light with a softbox, and this is a Pavo Slim 120B, and this was set to a warmer color temperature. I believe I had this at 4000 because I was working with darker skin tones. 1200D is set to 5600 Kelvin to emulate daylight, and I wanted to wrap that warmth because I was working on a McDonald's commercial, and this was supposed to feel very warm, especially on the skin tones. And what that light is doing is adding a bunch of fill on my face. This is a very commercial look, and you have to ask yourself about contrast ratios. And this was a very low, very flattering contrast ratio. So I'm basically taking that sunlight from outside, hitting my subject, and then wrapping it around my subject with that panel light. And this is a kind of a cheat code that I figured out when really lighting my subjects and figuring out what was missing. I remember walking in a lot of scenarios and just putting up one light and that being my main key light. And then I knew that there was something missing because although that my subject was lit, it was very flattering. There's no 3D dimension. I like to look at my image when it comes to lighting, especially in layers and wrapping around my light. And once I started doing this with 2 lights, I started to do it with 3 or 4 or whatever I had available to me and started working and looking at my image in layers. These are the tips that I wanted to share with you because I wish I knew these things when I started my cinematography career and started making the transition from a videographer to a director of photography. I hope this helps. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.